Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and we're going to continue rankings day with the wide receivers. Earlier on today, I released a quarterbacks video and the tight ends rankings. Both of those rankings are preliminary rankings, just like this set of rankings. However, they are going to be closer to the final product than the wide receivers here, as well as a little bit later than the running backs will be, because in these videos, I am starting off with the ECR, and then I am mixing them up, seeing where I differ compared to the ECR, the Expert Consensus Ranking from Fantasy Pros. Then I'll just talk on some of the players that I have the biggest difference in opinion of compared to the average ranker. Right here in the middle, red means hot, as in that is a good matchup, and blue is cold, bad matchup. A white would just be a lukewarm matchup, neither bad or good. I would encourage you to go up onto the website www.theffforge.com if you want my updated rankings. They will be up there on Thursday, as soon as I can get them up on Thursday, because that will be a much more my set of rankings that will have my projections involved, which will shuffle a lot of players around, but some of them will move a fair amount up or down, depending on how much I agree with the projection. And you can also find my final projections up here on YouTube 1 hour before kickoff on Sunday. That'll be before the main slate of games. There is a 9:30 a.m. game, so keep your heads up for that one. If you have any players in that game, make sure to set an alarm if you don't get up early enough to check on your players. That is 9:30 Eastern time. Let's just move on to the rankings. Starting at number 1, I have Tyreek Hill, followed by Cooper Kupp, A.J. Brown, Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, Justin Jefferson, Jalen Waddle, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Stephon Diggs, Amari Cooper, Chris Olave, and CeeDee Lamb to wrap up my wide receiver ones. A.J. Brown, I have 4 spots ahead of the ECR here. I have him ranked 3rd. The ECR on him is 7th, going up against Washington. It's a pretty nice matchup, so obviously going to like that for A.J. Brown. Like him despite the matchup. And so just playing him above a few players with worse matchups. And of course, all the way down here, playing him above Stephon Diggs, as well as several other players. And this comes down to the news that we got about Josh Allen and his UCL injury in his elbow. I'm sure even if he plays, and the expectation is that it's a limiting injury, so he's day-to-day right now. He may or may not play this weekend, but even if he plays, I would assume that's going to impact him. So just limiting my expectations for that offense this week. So that is why I have Stephon Diggs 6 spots behind the ECR. I have him at 9th. The ECR on him is 3rd, and I will probably be moving Josh Allen back as well. Thought about doing that with my projections yesterday, and I just wanted to hear more news on things to make sure that we weren't just getting bad news. But it sounds like he's, questionable. Regardless of his status, I once again going to limit him a little bit as far as expectations go. But Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen, you're still playing them if they're in, almost certainly. My wide receiver 2s begin off with Mike Evans, who I have at 13th. Then DK Metcalf at 14, Tyler Lockett, Juju Smith-Schuster, Deebo Samuel, Christian Kirk, DJ Moore, Brandon Ayuk, Josh Palmer. And to round this out, I have Devontae Smith, Jerry Jeudy, Darnell Mooney, ranked 22nd, 23rd, and wrapping it up with 24th with Mooney. And those are the 3 that we are going to talk about because I have them all 4 spots ahead of the ECR. So Devontae Smith, I have 22nd, ECR is 26th, going up against Washington. It's a good matchup. He's really only had 1 great game, 1 okay game, and other than that, it's been quite questionable. So I'm not very comfortable having him right here. I will probably be moving him back a little ways, but not too far, because he's one of those guys where the upside is something that you strive to get in your flex spot, but not necessarily your wide receiver 2, where I have him ranked right now. Of course, with bye weeks and everything, that does push up some of the rankings for players. So we'll see exactly where I end up on him, but just to give you a heads up, this is a ceiling play. This is a boom or bust play. So it's okay to go back a little bit further if you have a Jerry Jeudy and you just want something that appears to be a little bit safer. go right ahead with him, who I have ranked 23rd, going up against Tennessee, 4 spots behind ahead of the ECR at 27. It's a decent matchup against Tennessee, pretty much lukewarm, but a good matchup if anything. I'm expecting that Russell Wilson will be healthier, but how much healthier, don't know, and I think that the Jerry Jeudy throws are easier for him to make with the injuries that he has. It'll be great if he can get Courtland Sutton involved again, but for now, Jerry Jeudy appears to be the better wide receiver to have in that wide receiving core. Darnell Mooney is the last guy here going up against Detroit. That has a lot to do with his ranking, as well as just that offense getting better each and every week. Him obviously finally doing something and producing last week has been very helpful, and he's been incrementally getting better and better and more reliable. So I do like Darnell Mooney somewhere up in the back-end wide receiver 2 territory. Now let's move on to the wide receiver 3s, where I have Chris Godwin at 25, followed by Courtland Sutton, Allen Lazard, Gabe Davis, Terry McLaurin, Michael Pittman Jr., Curtis Samuel, Deontay Johnson, Rondale Moore, Terrace Marshall Jr., Adam Thielen, and George Pickens to wrap that up at 36. Let's start right off at the top here with Chris Godwin, who I have 5 spots behind the ECR. The ECR on him is 20. I have him 25th. Had him ranked a fair bit behind the ECR last week. That worked out fine. I would love to put him higher, but just the matchup this week isn't giving me any reason to push him up further. Don't mind the floor on Chris Godwin, but just like Mike Evans, there's some risk with that offense right now. Going up against Seattle, it's a tough matchup. Seattle's been pretty darn good this season, so I'm not overly excited to get him onto the field. But if you were deciding between him and Devonta Smith, it depends what you need that week. Depends your opponent and how much they have you trembling in your boots, and it depends your other players. Do you have a solid group of players but not a whole lot of upside, and you're in a good matchup against your opponent? Well, then go with Chris Godwin. Make sure you get yourself those 7 points and you're not sitting there with 2.4 points in that spot on your team. Then let's move on to Courtland Sutton, who I have 4 spots ahead of the ECR. The ECR is 30 on him. I have him at 26. I don't want to forget what he's done for the earlier portion of the season, going up against Tennessee. Once again, decent matchup, and there's just some of these players that I pushed backwards, as you could see. This group of 4 players that I had that I had up at 24th, 23rd, and 22nd there too, all moved up 4 spots. So there's just a group of players that I moved back essentially around here, and that includes Gabe Davis, who I have 7 spots behind the ECR. I have him at 28. The ECR on him is 21, going up against Minnesota. It's not a great matchup. It's not a bad matchup by any means either. But, of course, just like Stephon Diggs, all the more concern this week, especially for Gabe Davis. I won't be surprised if I move him back a little bit further in my final rankings even, because he's the deep target guy. How's Josh Allen going to be on those throws if he makes those throws? Isaiah McKenzie is someone who could benefit this week. Might be a DFS dart throw to think about if Josh Allen is playing this week. And that brings us to my 29th ranked player, who I have 4 spots behind the ECR, and that's Terry McLaurin. The ECR on him is 25, going up against Philadelphia, one of the toughest matchups that there is in the league, just in total as a defense. Very, very good. I'm not super excited to get Terry McLaurin out into my lineup this week, but he is a big play guy, and we know that Taylor Heinicke is going to take some of those shots to him, so they can always connect no matter what the defense, and we don't want to quite forget that. And that's why the Gabe Davises and the Devonta Smiths also end up a little bit higher in the rankings than where they end a lot of weeks. There's just this upside to some of those guys that you can't look over. Let's talk about Terrace Marshall Jr., who I've ranked 34th, 6 spots ahead of the ECR. The ECR on him is 40. It has a lot to do with this matchup going up against Atlanta. I did love the prospect of Terrace Marshall Jr. coming out of college. It hasn't worked until finally now. I think it was just last year that he was drafted. It's starting to show. We've got the same quarterback in that's helped him peak, and he has a role on that offense. So you can't ignore that when it's going up against a great matchup like Atlanta. He's a guy I'll definitely want to see what my projections are thinking on him. So now let's move on to my wide receiver 4s. It's starting off with Mecole Hardman, Drake London, Zay Jones, Brandon Cooks, Donovan Peoples-Jones, DeAndre Carter, Allen Robinson, Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton, Michael Gallup, Mac Hollins, and Chase Claypool to wrap that up at wide receiver 48. The only one that I have a big difference on here is Brandon Cooks, who I have 4 spots behind the ECR. I have him at 40. The ECR on him is 36th. Not a terrible matchup there against the New York Giants. Not a good one either. It's just, once again, sort of a lukewarm matchup. And there's just been so many questions around this. It hasn't worked out like all season. Maybe one game. So I'm not trying to force him into my lineup, and if my projections are saying to push him back further, I won't be opposed to that. So at some point, you do have to play him, and that would probably be Allen Robinson is a guy who I would just say, yeah, go with Brandon Cooks. Hope that it works out. But otherwise, not something I'm trying to rely on. And let's wrap this up with my wide receiver fives, an area that will definitely see some shuffling with projections. But let's start it off with my 49th wide receiver right now, Marvin Jones Jr. I should add, there are players in here that I don't even know that I'll rank, like a KJ Osborne down there. And there are other players that I will have ranked that I'm surprised aren't in here, like some of the, like Marquez Callaway or something for New Orleans. A little surprised there wasn't a second New Orleans wide receiver in the top 60. Things will look different with my rankings once they're up on the website. But let's back up here with wide receiver 50, Khalif Raymond, followed by Alec Pierce, Isaiah McKenzie, Kadarius Toney, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Paris Campbell, Chris Moore, Hunter Renfrow, Julio Jones, KJ Osborne, and wrap it all up with Robert Woods. So at 49, I have Marvin Jones Jr. going up against Kansas City. I have him 4 spots ahead of the ECR. The ECR is 53 on him. Hey, Kansas City, not a bad matchup to have a wide receiver going up against. Those wide receivers all get involved in Jacksonville. Who's going to be... Well, aside from Christian Kirk, between Zay Jones and Marvin Jones, it's a bit of a toss-up. Both of them can give you okay games, at least, so that's not bad. So there's a little bit of a safety factor in that sense of how much Jacksonville tends to throw, especially in a matchup like this. You'd expect that to happen a fair bit. So I like Marvin Jones enough to throw him out there if I'm looking at some of these guys. Isaiah McKenzie, like I spoke about earlier, maybe I'll get a little bit bold on him and move him up, thinking about the game flow and how Josh Allen might dump that ball off a fair bit to the short throws, but we'll see. I only want to get so bold unless you watch my quarterbacks video. Then I'm willing to get super bold. Now let's move on to Khalif Raymond, who I have ranked 50th. The ECR in him is 54, so I'm 4 spots higher, going up against Chicago. Not a great matchup, not a poor matchup, but I do think that that's probably a better matchup than it's been most of the season. Don't mind putting Khalif Raymond out there this week if Josh Reynolds is not healthy yet. Then Kadarius Toney, I have ranked 53rd, 5 spots ahead of the ECR. The ECR on him is 58. I'll have to see his usage. This was really more just I moved some other guys backwards, then I moved him up. But I have him ahead of Marquez Valdes-Scantling because, as far as I could tell, Marquez basically didn't get used in this last game. Maybe I'm forgetting something late, but I know at least at halftime I was like, oh, I guess Marquez Valdes-Scantling's not a part of this offense anymore. Expect Kadarius Toney to have more work than he had last week, and that was already more than I expected for week 1. So going up against Jacksonville, pretty decent matchup there. Taking him over Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who I have 5 spots behind at the ECR. ECR in him is 49. I have him at 54th. Once again, this just came down to where am I putting these Kansas City wide receivers? Who do I feel more comfortable with them compared to? And then I like Kadarius Toney more than Marquez Valdes-Scantling. So once again, not a terrible matchup. I'd like to see what his usage was last week. So that will determine in my real rankings a little bit where I put him because my projections are going to be a little off on him compared to, especially for sure, compared to what how much he was on the field last week. Then let's wrap this up with Hunter Renfrow, who I have 57th, 5 spots behind the ECR. The ECR in him is 52. Hasn't done a thing all year, so definitely not going to be a guy that I can easily recommend for you to start in any manner. But going up against Indianapolis, so it's a Luke Cold matchup. Once again, these rankings will all get shuffled around with my projections. That does not mean that I don't stand by these rankings, but they're my rankings 1.0. So go up onto the website or come and visit me Sunday to see my more refined rankings after pondering on some of these things some more and after seeing some of the usage and performances from this last week on paper. and how that affects my projections. So also you can see my projections, which has a ceiling, a floor, and an expected range for all of the players, which is just like a single number projection, but it's a range. Let's wrap that up right there. Meet you in the running backs videos. Go check out the quarterbacks and tight ends videos, which came out earlier if you have not. Peace out. Good luck this week.